Hello and welcome to Beyond Top 10 Tennis. My name is Dr. Ashley Morgan Berge and I'm your host. I am the author of 12 books, a CEO of 12 years, the founder of a startup set on data privacy, most importantly an elite performance coach of over 18 years, having worked with athletes throughout Europe, the United States to Australia. Most excitingly, I am the world's leading scientist on coach and athlete performance, specifically behind how to develop a top 10 tennis ranking. My work includes everything from mitigating injuries to conditioning behaviors that set a player up long-term for the long game towards a top 10 tennis ranking. I'm behind theories from the optimal performance theory, optimal behavior for optimal performance, the barrier breaker, the rule of transference to the golden rule. As has become custom, each episode we dive into one of my books to share additional insights and dig a little bit deeper. We've been focusing on the secrets to optimal coaching success, the role of experience, optimal performance practices and outcomes in the real world, with over 60 episodes to date. Today's topic plays its own role, like so many other episodes, in developing the player, parent to coach for that road ahead towards a top 10 tennis ranking. So, as always, buckle in and enjoy the ride. Thank you so much for joining us today. Whether you've been with us for some time now, thank you so much, or you are brand new, thank you so much all the same. I really would encourage you, if you have not, however, to track back, especially to our previous episode, primarily because I shared that with the Australian Summer of Tennis now here, it has to be the most exciting time of the year for those of us who are avid tennis followers or fans in any way, shape or form, because it is a whole entire month of tennis, essentially in our own backyard, although I do say that very, very loosely. But more so on a serious note was because it started to share that especially over the next couple of weeks, we're going to redirect our episodes, especially around player performance, key metrics, review some core results to really help, I think, players, especially if they are inside the top 10, vying for a round of 16 to quarterfinal berth at the 2024 Australian Open, or even better. So we have a lot of metrics, a lot of plays to go through where I can share specific patterns of play, what we can look out for. And of course, those of you who are familiar with my work, 3 of my books, the What Is Your Game Missing series, so that's What Is Your Game Missing, What Is Your Game Missing Now, and What Is Your Game Missing to Win, really broke down every single player that achieved a round of 16 result or higher at a Grand Slam over, I want to say from memory, 2 to 4 seasons. However, it was also a longitudinal analysis, so that spanned over, I think, roughly around 10 years. So really, I think, remember, it has actually been less than a month, only 3.5-ish weeks since the release of my 12th book. And I'm still incredibly excited and I really want to keep that going. So for those of you who have grabbed your copy, thank you so much for your support. Those of you who are new, I really want to encourage you to get your hands on it. And if you're not familiar, it is titled, by no surprise, I am sure, How to Develop a Top 10 Tennis Ranking. Because lo and behold, beyond top 10 tennis, ironically, came to fruition midway through 2023 when I was actively writing the book, because I thought what a great opportunity to share additional insights and really key pieces, I think, that weren't necessarily directly a part of the book but were inadvertent to it as well. So to share, I think, additional core insights that were, I think, equally and incredibly as powerful. So of course, when we're looking at the key metrics, where to go, and the developmental spectrum, which, if you've been following along, the Secrets to Optimal Coaching Success really shares some core insights. And for those of you who are familiar, or if you are new, our initial first 50 episodes, oh my goodness, it was quite the achievement to get that far in less than 6 months, because goodness me, was it a whirlwind. The Secrets to Optimal Performance Success really set the stage. So again, I really want to encourage you, if you are new, there could be some, I think, aspects you could be unfamiliar with, or you might be a bit confounded by, and that's okay. But I want to encourage you to backtrack then to, traverse through those episodes, because as has, I think, become custom over the last 6+ months, is that we're really setting the stage and then pushing the marker a little bit further. And there's obviously a reason behind that, because that's essentially what the work does, whether it is book 1, The Secrets to Optimal Performance Success, through to book 12, How to Develop a Top 10 Tennis Ranking. It's incredibly powerful. But I think before I dive into, the United Cup's just wrapped up with the Brisbane International to the Auckland event, and we've got the Adelaide International commencing this week as well. So it is jam-packed, and I'm sure there are more that I'm just not mentioning, not intentionally, but I think one of the biggest concerns leading up to this, and I have shared this in previous episodes, is around, I think, misguidance. So, and I say that in respect to if you're not familiar necessarily what you're doing, if you don't really know how to develop a top 10 tennis ranking, which is essentially 99.9% of those of you out there, and that's expected, and that is obviously why this body of work has come to life. But where I'm going here is that it leaves you very susceptible / vulnerable, irrespective of your age. I think the younger you are, potentially the more susceptible, though that is a very, I think, stereotypical. So what I am sharing here is that you're really looking to progress towards a top 10 tennis ranking. And there are so many coaches out there, and hopefully most of them with very good intentions. Though we have to be very mindful that unless they have the backstory, and so when I say backstory, I mean the data, unless they've engrossed themselves with these tech, so this body of work, it means they are not up to speed. They do not have the toolkit required to develop a top 10 tennis ranking now. And I say that because, and we've obviously got the data to, I think, underscore this, which again is, I think, more explained in more detail in How to Develop a Top 10 Tennis Ranking and the Power of the Eighth Key in there. And it's really about how the game has not just changed, but specific metrics involved. Now, you'll hear me say metrics quite a lot. And I think those of you who are familiar with Beyond Top 10 Tennis, you understand this, because it really, I think, covers a variety of aspects. So we're really looking at technical proponents of a player's game, specific angles of influence, micro discrepancies, different angles when we're looking at the degrees, whether it's a 90 degree, 180 degree, somewhere in between to 270 degrees. And it's not necessarily about that, but we're looking at the kinetic chain, so how the body works, and we're simplifying it. But obviously from my text, The Science of Elite Performance, it's very detailed and quite scientific, I think, in that light, to the more lighter ones, which we are on now, so The Secrets to Optimal Coaching Success, and how it really shares, I think, the more simplified coaching processes involved in developing that top 10 tennis ranking. And it's really important to recall I am your tennis coaching guru, which is, yes, a bit of fun, but it's one of those texts that has 10 years of tennis lessons / planners, and that has been designed to integrate these key metrics and mechanics along the way that delivers a second decade of play. So cumulatively, we're looking at 20 years. So we're looking at whether you're from 8 years of age to 18 years of age for that first 10 years, towards that second 10 years. So by the time you say 24 to 28 years of age, you're reaching, I think, that peak level of play. But without getting, I think, too sidetracked, the concern is there are a lot of, I think, elite coaches out there, very good coaches, those who have achieved success. Previously, I have had an episode that did touch briefly on Simona Halep's unfortunate case / circumstances involving her coaching team, etc. So I'm not going to go into that, obviously, just as a point of reference. That's a couple of episodes back. But where I'm going here, you have some very popular coaches that have their names, which I'm not going to mention, have become almost synonymous with exceptional coaching practices. And I think it's really important to share a word of warning / caution here, because again, we've got the data, the research, and for those of you who are, peeking their eyebrows up, it does have to do with coaches on both the WTA and ATP tours, as long as players, and it's quite involved. More than 150,000 inferences, the biggest study of its kind worldwide. It's incredibly substantial, the first universally that's uncovered this. I can't stress this enough, and I think I really do underplay it, because I personally think it's groundbreaking. It's incredibly exciting, but for me it's a normal practice, because I've been responsible, I think, for it for the last 11 plus years now. And if I was in your shoes, I would be running home with it, going, oh my goodness, I am set, top 10 tennis ranking, here I come. However, I know not all of you are going to think like that, and that's okay. So I'm really, I think, sharing or talking to those of you who are on a similar wavelength. Where I'm going here is that social media, and I do have a episode on this, again, a couple of episodes back, and it really touched on, I think, people sharing different coaching tips to advice. And this ranges from club, academy level coaches to those on tour, those who have even worked with players and achieved Grand Slam success. Now, what really is shared in addition to in my latest release is also why this is, I think, incorrect / untrue. And it's because there's a reason why one coach and one player achieve very good things together. So whether that is 1 Grand Slam, 2 Grand Slams, 5 Grand Slams, or even more. And there's also an underlying reason why that same coach does not achieve the same results with another player. And this is where we have to be very careful, because if that same coach is giving coaching tips to you, and so I say to you, if you're aspiring to head towards a top 10 tennis ranking, this is where it gets a bit messy / dangerous in a manner of speaking, because it was only today even and yesterday, so more recently, where I've come across, I think, this specific coach sharing these insights, and I'm sure with very good intentions. Though when we have to strip it back, we go, well, one had to do with looking at the forehand ground stroke. And those of you who are not aware, I am actually the world's leading expert, authority, and scientist behind the forehand ground stroke. That is me. And it is very new. So in the last couple of years, obviously the work was been 11 years in the making, and it has been 9 years, I think, since it was confirmed in that manner. And there's been a lot of offshoots. So obviously how that has positioned me to optimize again the backhand ground stroke towards the serve, volley, mechanics, and ultimately a lot in between, and then be behind how to develop a top 10 tennis ranking with everything obviously wrapped up there. Where I'm going is one of the tips there was about the wrist, is that how to obviously optimize your forehand has to do with your wrist. And this is really concerning because it's actually unfortunately quite incorrect. And again, those of you who are familiar with my work, it's all about optimizing your results, so achieving best status in the world without getting injured. So it's about mitigating injuries. You can look at Del Potro, for example, and his wrist and the issues he's had over the years. Djokovic more recently has a little tweak, we'll say, with his wrist he's looking after. I'm sure he's fine. But there have been a number of players over the years that have had issues with their wrist, and it is a very small joint, very small, minute muscles in that area, and essentially you do not want to abuse those muscles. You don't want to take advantage of that. Your work is not in the wrist, so it's actually a very big misconception. It's obviously and actually in the movement. So obviously how you function and hit the ball, how you brush the ball with your strings, and that trajectory, how you're using your body. And that's obviously where the kinetic chain comes into play. And when we look at players from Serena Williams, Novak Djokovic, Rafael Nadal to Roger Federer, all of these 4 players with 20 Grand Slams or more, so all 4 with 20 Grand Slams or more, these players use their whole body. There is not one aspect of their game where they switch a part of their body off and just go, it's an isometric, I think, stroke, so I'm just going to use this part in this joint. There is nothing more incorrect than saying it is you are reliant on a specific joint or one specific muscle. It's very dangerous to share that, because by someone who has made a name for themselves because they've worked with a player who has achieved very good things, obviously they did something exceptionally right with that player, which again we know and we underscore, and there are some key ingredients there, but there's also a reason why in the last couple of years that coach has not been able to replicate that with another player and or athlete, irrespective, I think, of different, reports or what the media has suggested. That is unfortunately not the case, and again our data pinpoints exactly why it is. So I'm not going to elaborate specifically here. I think what I'm sharing is the need to be cautious, and the need to be cautious when you're listening to, I think, many people online, irrespective who they are, if they've won a Grand Slam with a player or not. I think on the other end, I was looking at a coach that I'm not personally not sure who they are, but that's okay. And they were giving coaching tips, which is wonderful. Though on the other side, the tips they were sharing were very similar. So, and they're looking at very, I think, it's almost a conflict of interest when we're looking at the body and we're looking at optimizing. And the most concerning part is this is why we have so many players vying for a top 10 tennis ranking and they don't get there. Remember or recall over the previous episodes when I've shared, I think, additional insights on how to develop a top 10 tennis ranking, and I think key pieces out of that. Remember that the work is so specific. We know why a player is ranked top 20 in the world and why they are not a top 10 tennis player. We know what's stopping them. That's how concise it is. We know why a player ranked inside the top 10 has not won a Grand Slam. We know why a player is positioned to win a Grand Slam, and we even have metrics that underscore the likelihood, leveraging our predictive analytics, if they will win a second Grand Slam, and if they grow, so that's replicated success in our work. So it's incredibly, I think, it is groundbreaking, but it's incredibly rewarding to understand, I think, the complete cycle on how that is the case. And we'll get to that later with the Australian Open around the corner, which is obviously the first Grand Slam of the season, and players who are really positioned to either claim their maiden Grand Slam or achieve replicated success and or more, which again is incredibly exciting. But we're looking at players who are not ranked inside the top 100, players who are at club and or academy level, and they're looking to progress towards the top 100. We need to make sure you've got some really fine-tuned metrics to push you through that second decade of play. So essentially you're in that first decade of play, roughly. So you are 16 towards 21, 22, looking towards that peak period to make your mark inside the top 200, to progress inside the top 100, and hopefully not plateau and continue. Because again, remember, we know why with the metrics why you plateau. We know why that peak performance stagnates. And that could be at 80 in the world, 150 in the world, 300 in the world. We know why you hover on that ranking, why you don't break through. The good news, the best news is for the players out there, it's not just you. For the coaches, it's not just you. It's a two-way street. So it is the coach and the player. So that's why when you're looking at those who are named the best coaches in the world, why that's not the case. Something I don't often share is that I am the world's leading scientist on coach and athlete performance, and I'm also the world's leading coach on that, and the world's leading coach behind how to develop a top 10 tennis ranking. However, I'm so much more than a coach, with my doctorate behind me as that researcher and that scientist to that author who has unveiled the specific data to metrics behind that. And I do have episodes why I don't necessarily share, I think, the coaching standpoint, because yes, unfortunately, sexism in the coaching landscape, ageism, especially how it affects women, I think, in the sporting arena. And it's almost like a safety net by just saying scientist in contrast to coach, because there are so many, I think, negative connotations associated with that, stereotypical, I think, stigmas, etc. And so I won't get into that. That is, we've touched on that in previous episodes. And I wanted to shift the conversation, not necessarily around my expertise to area of authority, but it's to help you develop that top 10 tennis ranking, because the most rewarding part after spending the last 11 years of my life uncovering this, and obviously authoring and publishing those 12 texts, is essentially, one, unheard of for someone to do that, especially I think in this domain. Two, to be, I think, within my age range. Those of you who are familiar, if not, jump on over to AMA International, click on Dr. B, and you will see it all there. And obviously, thoughts, feedback, all of the above. Come say hi is always welcome. Obviously, on our social media posts platforms that Beyond Top 10 Tennis shows, and is always included in our episode notes. Where I'm going though again is we really need to be cautious. irrespective if there's a coach out there who has made a name for themselves and has become popularized because of that, or not. I think one of the best parts, and I do not personally know them, it's just a very good example that I've recently read up on, is Rybakina's. She's had an incredible run with her, obviously, Wimbledon results, finalist results, and most recently claiming the Brisbane International. Incredibly exciting. The most interesting part, however, is from her coach. And even though I think I only know a little bit, but what I'm sharing here is that they believed mutually in one another a couple of years ago, and they came up with a plan. And this was something I was just briefly reading the other day. And I think what's so rewarding is that when we're looking at the 7 keys towards the 8 keys, they're there. And if you're not familiar with that, the text 7 keys to optimize your life, that using tennis to develop behaviors that deliver optimal performances in play and in life, and yes, that is a very long subtitle, really underscores the 7 key ingredients to develop a top 10 tennis ranking. And obviously the latest text releases the 8th key, which is incredibly detailed, to really bring it home. What this is about, though, when you find that pairing, that coach and that athlete that works together to achieve incredible things, yes, that is what you want. Although we have to be very cautious when we're looking at other coaches who have achieved exceptional results with another player. There's a reason why that is not the case with another player. And that is why when they begin to share coaching tips, just be very careful, because the latest one I read, and I think this one was actually, I think, before I jumped on to record today's episode, and I thought, hold on, because if you're a 12-year-old listening to this and you start using your wrist, there's a very good likelihood in the next 2 to 3 years you're going to have an injury specifically in that area, and potentially you won't be able to finish that first decade of play because your wrist will be so run down with injury, and that's incredibly disheartening. So, and that is why we need to be cautious. You have players, and we've got episodes on this, that are in their teenage years and they rock up to Grand Slams in tape. They are just falling apart and holding themselves together with sports tape. That's not how it's meant to be. You can use tape obviously as a precaution. One of my favorite examples here is obviously Serena Williams, who would religiously tape her ankles as a precaution, because some of us are more susceptible to those ankle rolls, and I can definitely put my hand up there. I cannot tell you or share how many times I have rolled my ankles. I honestly cannot, to the point where as I ventured away from tennis and into running, those of you again who are familiar with my backstory, and that even though I have rolled them over a period of time, I do go through phases where I'll tape them, or maybe I don't put the work in to rehab them and they do not recover optimally. But do not do what I do. That is purely out of laziness and wanting to just continue running and not rehab, again, because of my background in rehabbing so often. However, I share that is that I know what it's like to rehab an injury, and over again, and why a lot of my work, I retract that, all of my work is essentially underscored by making sure we're safeguarding the body / mitigating injuries to ensure you can enjoy that second decade of play at your peak. You can ascend towards a top 10 tennis ranking. All right, so I think without further ado on that, I've given that word of caution. I've shared why. I've shared additional insights from how to develop a top 10 tennis ranking, as well as additional other texts that I've penned, but also why it's important to be cautious of your social media posts, irrespective if you're listening to someone who has achieved exceptional results with another player or not. And that also goes for players as well. They could be an incredible player in their own right, or they could be a retired player. but there is a reason why they are either not working with a player at this stage, and or there's a reason why they did not achieve X, Y, and Z heights, because we really have to remember, whether it is a Federer, Nadal, Djokovic to Serena, they didn't get there on their own. Of course, they did a lot of the hard work. You got to remember their coaches at that time or throughout their career also didn't get to where they are without that player, because it's a two-way street. And I just can't stress that enough, because it really is the coach and the player and the willingness to form that team and work together. When you have a player sharing specific metrics, just be careful that they're covering those 8 keys. If you're not familiar with the 8 keys, that's where how to develop a top 10 tennis ranking comes in. It's the same with the coaches. If they are not, I think, underscoring or knowledgeable of those 8 keys, there's your word of warning. And that's been touched on again in previous episodes, and the body of work has been designed to really simplify these practices to touch on the 8 keys. Because again, if you want to develop a top 100 ranking, look, you're probably going to be okay. Top 80, you're probably going to be okay, but there's no guarantee. We have a specific guarantee here, which again is a world first and incredibly exciting. Though that's not what it's about, because when we're looking at ranking results to ratios, we're set on that top 10 tennis ranking. That's what it's all about. If you want to develop a top 10 tennis ranking, you come here. If you want to know how to win a Grand Slam to more than one Grand Slam, you come here. If you want to make sure you become a professional tennis player on the WTA or ATP Tour and you mitigate injuries so you're safeguarding your body, you come here. If you want to become a professional tennis player and you don't care what ranking you get to, if you reach a ranking plateau, you want to do the hard way and you want to reach 80 in the world and then just not progress, 50 in the world and struggle, or even 500 in the world and wonder, oh my gosh, why am I not progressing? Then you're probably going to stay with who you're with. But if you want those questions answered, you come here. So there's obviously that grey area that if you don't have specific metrics you're seeking, it doesn't matter. But if you do have your eyes set on developing that top 10 tennis ranking, this is where this body of work is all about. Okay, now let's head into, I think, first up, the United Cup. If you watched Swiatek against Kerber last night, especially that first set, I hope you were blown away as much as I was, because I can tell you what, seeing Kerber play the way she did in that first set, especially when it was 3-all, she was playing at that level that got her to her Grand Slam finals and or when she won them, because the level of play blew me away, especially when I was looking at her, I think, earlier in the week, especially irrespective if it was against Sakari in that first set, or where was it? I want to say against France as well. That was 3 sets. That was very solid again against Garcia. And again, for a player who has been, I think, away from the game, who has just again become a new mother, to reach this level is mind-blowing. We know Svitolina has done and or achieved similar fates, but when Svitolina took her time away from court to start a family, she was still ranked, I think, from memory, in the top 10. Kerber, I think, at that time was ranked inside the top 30, may have slipped slightly, but was always a serious contender. But especially seeing her play the way she did against the number 1 player in the world, so Swiatek, was absolutely phenomenal. Granted, that second set was 6-love. That's okay. And I say it's okay because it's understandable when you come back from whether it is 12 to 18 months off tour. you're going to need to find that level of endurance to stamina again. But to toe the line with the number one player in the world, and Swiatek was playing phenomenal. It is not like either player was having a bad day. It was solid. And I think the scoreline does not, I think, do Kerber justice completely, though I don't want to take anything away from Swiatek. She really had to lift her game, and I think it was incredibly exciting to see. But I think what's even more important here is I want to touch on some of those key metrics. Now, I think most excitingly, and I did post something a couple of days ago on Twitter about this, is that if you're looking at Kerber right now, a couple of days ago, it was, her metrics were around 20 to 30% of where they used to be when she won the Australian Open. Now, if you're looking fast forward a couple of days to when she was playing Swiatek, those metrics increased roughly, I'm going to say, to 60 to 70%, if not slightly higher. Swiatek, I'm going to say, without doing any specific calculations, she was sitting around 80 to 90%, which again is absolutely exceptional. And I think the best part about all of this is that Swiatek has been playing solid all week. And her match even against Garcia, 3 sets, which is very solid to see her come through. And I want to say against Zhang, that was a very solid match, and that was actually tough. So it's not like Swiatek has been having a clean sweep all tournament, but she has had some more, let's say, easy matches, and those that did challenge her. And what I like is that she is being challenged, but even better, if you look from her initial progress to her finale, there is a very distinct level where a progression has been achieved. And that is what I find the most interesting and what we really want to keep an eye on. If Swiatek had been pushed to 3 sets every single match and there was no trajectory, that's very different. But when we're looking at specifics to those micro discrepancies, she did play a very clean game against Kerber. And I want to say she's on track for a very healthy progression. And with the Australian Open, less than a week away now when this comes to air, this is a very good metric. I'm not going to elaborate on that anymore, although granted Swiatek is number one, even though Sabalenka almost, if she did win the Brisbane International, was potentially going to claim the number one spot again. I'm definitely in favour of Swiatek's form in contrast and how she's been tracking. Recall again our predictive analytics and obviously all our data that underscores how we know who's going to progress to the round of 16, to the quarters, semis, etc. of Grand Slams. We use these metrics not to say who necessarily in advance, obviously after, because of obviously ethical connotations associated with that. But I think it's very healthy to share Swiatek's core metrics that are underscored in how to develop a top 10 tennis ranking and the What Is Your Game Missing series and how it's been progressing. And now if you are familiar with my other episodes or previous episodes, I think you understand that even more. Kerber, however, is the same rate. Is she on track for a round of 16 or further? That really depends if she plays this coming week and if there's more to be seen. Though I can tell you this, how Kerber played against Swiatek in that first set, irrespective of going down 6-3, if she's able to sustain that level of performance, that's a word of warning. That is a very big danger card. And this level of danger was not as present 18 months ago. That is, I think, the most exciting part, because without a doubt, Kerb has brought her A game back, and the last, I want to say 2 to 3 seasons on tour prior to taking her time away to begin her family, was not at this level that I saw in the first set. Now that should tell you something, I think quite exciting for those of you who have been following her over the course, I think, of the last decade. Okay, and next in line would be Zverev versus Hurkacz in the final of the United Cup. And those of you who are watching, I hope you were as blown away as I was. I definitely thought it was going to be wrapped up in 2. And Zverev, his level of play, I think without a doubt, it's fair to say he's back. And I know insofar as rankings are concerned, that Zverev has been edging on closer and closer towards the top 10, and he's now positioned inside the top 10, sitting at number 7. Having been where he was 2 years ago, and having to go through, I think, quite a drastic rehab, regress to progress, this is one player we can say with his coaching team knows of those 8 keys, irrespective of that displacement. And that's what's so exciting, because you've got players, for example, to the likes of, I'm going to say, Casper Ruud, who has regressed slightly outside the top 10, who's not so much. Although you've got Alex de Minaur, who I'm going to touch on later, who does, and that is why he has been progressing. Though some players who were inside the top 10, from Norrie, for example, to Felix, sitting at 29, we know there have been some regressions, even from Dan Evans. It's very, I think, sad in a manner of speaking, but we really want to underscore those 8 keys. Wawrinka is coming back, sitting at 49, and it's the first time I'm seeing this as I'm sharing this with you, which I'm very excited by. Though I think the number 1 player who I'm most excited about, because he has been progressing and he is finding form from where he almost once was. He's not at that level, but almost, and if you can guess, sitting at 42 as I'm recording, is Andy Murray. And he has been having, I think, some really solid results. Look, is he playing back into the top 10? No, of course not. However, is he dangerous? He definitely is. He has his days where his movement it complements his game, which means obviously to develop a top 10 tennis ranking and you're looking at those core metrics, it's all about your movement. So recall earlier in today's episode just about a wrist joint. No, it's not about a joint, it's about your movement. And that is why I think having that issue with his hip is so or was quite derailing, because your hips are that important and you are reliant on that because of core metrics that obviously are underscored throughout our body of work. But going back to Zverev, and he's made incredible progress that I think almost goes ignored in a way, because it was almost expected that he'd be back on top. But you've got the likes of Thiem, for example, who's not back there. Raducanu, who's not back there when you're looking at injuries. Osaka is going to be interesting to see, obviously, what happens with her progress. Nadal, for example, that was quite disheartening, but he played a very solid match. Though I want to really wrap up here the United Cup. Zverev played phenomenal. And I think on that point, yes, Germany winning the title, that was a bit surprising, though I'm going to say that having Swiatek and Hurkacz coming off these singles, they definitely would have been a little bit exhausted. And I think Zverev playing in the mix with Siegmund coming in with fresh legs, I'm going to say that probably made quite a substantial difference, even though it was 10-4 in the third. That's an exceptional tournament. Garcia taking Swiatek to 3, I think that's very exciting. But I think the biggest player, the biggest result of the tournament is going to be Alex and Manure. Overcoming Djokovic, yes, and obviously in our previous episode we highlighted obviously the likelihood of that happening, which is really cool because again I think that underscores our metrics. And that episode went to air, and that evening was when Alex played Djokovic, and what a great match. But also it's not surprising because when we're looking at the data, and I've been tracking Alex for a number of years now, it's his time. And again is why when he played Zverev and overcame him in 3 sets, what a great match, again, because it's not surprising. And we really need to remember, whilst Zverev is 7 in the world, top 10 player, exceptional, Alex has been progressing. He's sitting at number 12 now. This time last year, top 20. And I think 18 months ago, inside the top 25, he's slowly been putting the work in. He's slowly been progressing. And that's what we look for. We want those, I think, gradual progressions, not, I think, rapid fire that I've touched on. Raducanu, for example, was rapid fire. And that is why there's been such a substantial regression. And there's all this, I think, expectation to have her back at the top, but it's like, hold on, this was a very rapid fire progression, which means the regression was just the same. So to get you inside the top 30, top 20 again, we really need to find, I think, where your form is and to build upon that, opposed to expecting. I think another player who's worth, I think, sharing a little bit more on is probably Tsitsipas. Zverev did overcome Tsitsipas and probably would have expected it to be the other way around. However, with Zverev playing how he has been playing, I'm not surprised, because we need to remember when Zverev was at his peak before obviously his injury that happened. So obviously when he was playing Nadal at the French Open, Zverev's form was on song as he was projected to make a Grand Slam final again, and or potentially be in the best form to claim his maiden slam. Obviously that did not happen, though his level back then was, and his ranking was in front of Tsitsipas. Tsitsipas has been able to hold his own, granted he's been healthy. So to have Zverev come back and beat Tsitsipas again, I think this really underscores and goes to show that Zverev has come back. He has found his form. He is a little bit dangerous. That said, I am being a little bit sarcastic here with that little, because oh my goodness, number 7 with all the progressions Zverev's been making, and with the metrics when I'm looking at, even though Alex did overcome him, when we're looking at his other matches and I think how far he's been able to progress, even 3 against Montenegro, it's not that he's playing poorly and or bad. We're really looking at that level of consistency, how he can hold his own. Even 3 sets against Mannarino, sure, we could say that could have been done in 2 sets, but if he's getting all these matches and these games under his belt and he's able to finish the tournament, I think in 3 over Herxax at such an exceptional level, top 10, going off against a top 10. This is what it really comes down to and what it's all about. And I think that's a good way to wrap the United Cup up, and it's time now to head on over to the Brisbane International. Now, I don't think it is any surprise with Rybakina walking away with the title. Granted, she did overcome Sabalenka, and I'm sure maybe not as many people could see the first set result being 6-love. Of course, 6-3 in the second set, but I think the scoreline doesn't really do it justice. Rybakina played an incredibly clean set. Her metrics were on song. which essentially, or what I mean by that is that yes, she was performing in alignment with, in correlation with the metrics that we've discussed previously and that are shared in how to develop a top 10 tennis ranking, and it was clean enough to go, of course she's going to win the title. And I think on the flip side, looking at Sabalenka, whilst her metrics obviously are impressive, so it's not to take anything away from her, and she had been performing quite well all tournament, which shows by her making the final. However, when we're looking at one player and another player, and we're weighing them up in a manner of speaking, and we're looking at, I think, these specific patterns. So recall in previous episodes how I've shared and or divulged more on specific movement patterns when we're looking at optimizing our performances, specific keys that correlate with that top 10 tennis ranking towards making Grand Slam championships to replicated success. Rybakina was ahead, and that is why it's not shocking and or surprising. I think the most interesting part to come out of this is that we know both of them have one Grand Slam to their name. They are both positioned to win a second Grand Slam potentially. So there are specific rulers around replicated success and when and time frames. And what I mean by that, and I'm sharing a lot here, but to learn more, it is the what is your game missing to win and what is your game missing now. Both of those titles specifically pinpoint this in more detail. But what I'm getting to is that both of these players we know can win a second Grand Slam. Now, when we're looking at these metrics, one outweighs the other. But obviously one title is not enough to go by. But I can tell you this, both of them are on the clock now, which means we know within the next, for one of them, the next 12 months, and the other one, the next, I think, 6 months to see what's going to happen. And I think it's really important to remember that Rybakina has made those finals. Sabalenka is really well positioned having made the final, though I'm not going to share, I think, specific outcomes or predictions and or what our predictive analytics are sharing and or saying, because we've already touched on that previously and earlier in today's episode, and obviously that underlying why. But what I can share is I think those key factors. Another player I really want to bring attention to is Azarenka. Having made the semi-final, going 2-4 versus Sabalenka, it was not a bad match. Sabalenka played solid, very clean, and you know what? Azarenka is finding her form. I was actually quite impressed. And when we're looking at, or we've discussed, I think Kerber's comeback earlier on, I think it's really, I think it's not shared enough that Azarenka is a mum too, and she was at the prime of her game as well when she took time away. And I think from memory she was inside the top 10. Similar, I think Svitolina was in the top 10 too, and I think I draw attention to that because I think of the longevity there. And Kerber, of course, top 30 at the time roughly. I do not have any of these numbers in front of me, so these are all just approximate numbers. But how she's been able to keep her form, find that form, maintain that form, she is always a dark horse. And I say that because we all know she's made the finals of a Grand Slam since then. And I think it's what we talk about is that maintenance. And that is what, and this is again in, I think, this body of work, but that's what we're looking at. Can you sustain this level of play? And that's what differentiates the 8% to the 92%. So recall again previous episodes and how to develop a top 10 tennis ranking. For the very first time in the history of our sport, we've uncovered what only 8% of players know and what 92% do not. But it's the same with coaches, what 8% of coaches know and what 92% do not. There's a reason why only 8 players every year priority is stay inside the top 10 as a minimum, because we know their players being displaced, whether it is to 11 or 12 or 13. There is a reason why they're pushed outside of the top 10. That is how fine-tuned, specific and accurate our data is, and it really delivers the new edge of play. And again, I think tracking back to earlier in today's episode, touching on coaches who have achieved really good things with other players, we need to go, well, if you have the 8 keys, we know you can do this with another and another and another and another. And does that player have it? Then we know that they're on song for their maiden championships and the next and the next and the next. And that is why we know those top 4 that I've touched on, why 20 plus Grand Slams are really not that surprising when we're looking at the data. And that's how exciting it is. Why we've got the likes of Osaka to Swiatek with 4 Grand Slams already. And we're really, I think I'm excited to see how Osaka goes and with her form and if she's really able to hold that. And we will touch on that shortly. But Rybakina as well in her semis, it was very clean. I think she played a very clean tournament. Sabalenka versus Katetkina was very clean as well. And that's why I think it's really important not to overshadow the final, because it's not that Sabalenka played bad. Rybakina was a different level, and it's really important to underscore, especially at this level of play. You've got 2 players, number 2, and I think Rybakina's at number 3 in the world at the moment, and that is incredibly impressive, because I think it's definitely arguable to push Rybakina a little bit further, and it's definitely a dark horse when we're looking at Swiatek. And I say dark horse almost ironically, because of course she's primed to win her 2nd Grand Slam. Sabalenka potentially is primed to win her 2nd Grand Slam as well. And Swiatek is primed, given her performance at the United Cup, to win her 5th Grand Slam. So it's all to do with that maintenance and when we're looking at those core metrics. And I'm going to keep a close eye on all of these players in the next week and obviously the rest of the month. But what we're looking at is where their games break down. Are their games going to break down? And really what's to come? Look, Ostapenko as well. She had a very impressive tournament. Even though it was 3 sets versus Azarenka, it's not that she played bad. And I think it's really important, I think, to underscore that. And there's a slew of other players. I mean, Pliskova, she played solid. Ostapenko obviously coming out in 3. And little instances, I think, from that perspective. Collins, 3 sets. I'm not too surprised by that. I'm really happy to see her back with some good form. Stevens, however, was down in 3. But, you know, at the end of the day, it is 3 sets. And I'm happy with that. But I'm really looking to see, again, what is to come in the next, 2-3 weeks. What's that level of maintenance that we're going to be looking at? And that's where I think where it gets even more exciting. Kenin, more surprisingly, 2 very tight sets, though obviously she did go down. Osaka, she won that first match back, and I think she played quite well. And it was really good to see, I think, the form that she's in now, but there are some few key insights here. Most, I think, interestingly, is yes, 3 sets against Pliskova, but we all know Pliskova is positioned as a top 10 player on any day of the week. Sure, maybe her ranking does not align with that at this stage. However, at the end of the day, she is incredibly dangerous. She knows what it's like to make the later rounds of Grand Slams. So for Osaka to get so close after having 12 plus months off tour is incredibly impressive. And I think that really needs to be underscored. There are obviously key correlations there with Nadal and his results. But Osaka, I'm going to say, and go out almost on a bit of a limb, it's to do with obviously the matches she's able to get under her belt. However, metrics specifically, very similar to a few other players I've mentioned, were they at the level they once were when we're looking at that 80-90% plus for a top 10 performance? No. they were probably gauging around 40 to 50% when we're looking at consistency, rate of application, rate of progress, and when we're looking at those progressions, regressions, and those specific, I think, keys, metrics, and the aforementioned correlations. But it's a start, and I think that's what's really important. Now I think it's really important / exciting. We're looking at the men's side, and I think the best part here that I'm really happy with is seeing Dimitrov walk away with the title, because I think it's roughly his first since 2017. So to find this form at this stage is incredibly impressive and really needs to be run home. And at the same time, 7-6, 6-4 against Rune, who's inside the top 10, who's been pretty good. I mean, his results haven't been as consistent, as solid as potentially they could have been. But again, I think he slowed down in the later half of the year. So making the finals of the Brisbane International is very solid. And Dimitrov played like his top 10 self. Granted that is not his obviously current ranking. I think it's equally arguable to know that Dimitrov has that potential. I mean, look, he's currently sitting at 14 at this stage, but he has been, I think, closer around the 20 to 30 range for some time. But when Dimitrov finds his form, he is dangerous against any top 10 player. And I think that's what's most exciting. And I would argue and say that his metrics, they were not around like the 80, 90, probably at 60 to 70%. But they were solid, and they were solid enough. Rune, however, I'm going to say it was really more of a cause for concern when we're looking at anticipation, reactivity that I've touched on, and just finding that rhythm. Dimitrov really took that away from him. His metrics were there, not as good as I've seen him. So there's a slight regression there. But I think more importantly, Dimitrov versus Thompson, that was two solid sets, and Thompson was quite impressive in this respect, namely because 3 sets against Nadal. Of course, biggest win of his career. That said though, Nadal coming out and going down in 3, that is a really solid match. I think we can all say that we were really happy to see Rafa back, but his form was actually very solid and very good. And I think the third set, it just got a little bit too much. His level did drop. Again, because when we're looking at maintenance and being able to keep that level at the highest at this level that he's used to for a longer period of time, and he has not had that, not enough of it. So it's not that he played bad, it's more so that Thompson stuck to the plan, stuck to his game, and Nadal's just not there yet. And that's really what it was about. We're definitely going to miss him at the Australian Open. That was definitely, I think, heartbreaking in manner of speaking. But I don't want to take anything away from Thompson, because he really did play solid enough to, I think, to put Nadal under pressure, to need to lift his level. And obviously we know what has happened. In the earlier rounds though, I think when Nadal played Kubler, that was scary in a really good way. That was retro, because he was playing that cleanly. So I really think it's being pushed longer, timeliness or time-wise in this respect, that I think really made the difference. I think they are the primary standouts that I've touched on. We've got other players playing quite well, but the ones I think that I've mentioned, I really want to, I think, run home with it, and to keep an eye on. I think when we're looking at the United Cup, the Brisbane International, the one that we've got left there is the ASB Classic that's been over obviously in Auckland. And I think the primary player here is obviously Gorf, taking the title. That said though, Gorf playing Svitolina in, I think, the final, was the most exciting part, because I was very excited to see Svitolina back nice and deep. And the same is apparent for Gauff. Coming off, obviously, the US Open, we really wanted to see if her level was still there. We often see those who have won the US Open, there is a bit of a drop. Or it's consistent, as in they're able to amp up and keep that level of play. So having Gauff at this level is a very good metric. I'm going to put Gauff in line with Rybakina and Swiatek and Sabalenka with how they're playing, and then I'm going to throw Svitolina in there as well. I'm not sure in respect to longevity, timeliness, etc., in respect to the later, but all of these players have been holding their own. They've had a really, I want to say, solid end of season to the past 6 months, where they're able to maintain that, and that's what we're looking for. Rather than that inconsistency, we want to see what you're able to maintain and what's your baseline. So recall previous episodes, and I've touched on that baseline performance, and then we want to move it up a notch. So we're really looking at baseline performances that are steadily being moved up a notch or two, because when you're looking at, I think, heading into a Grand Slam, this is where it gets even more and more exciting. I think, of course, it's definitely worth mentioning Raducanu. Having been sidelined with injuries for some time, she had a pretty good start back, and look, she made the round of 16, 3 sets against Svitolina. Definitely could have gone either way in those first 2 sets, definitely. Obviously, again, when we're looking at maintenance, stamina, endurance, and obviously if you have, I think, that level of maintenance again to withhold and to then continue to keep up, to keep pace. So obviously that 6-1 in the third really, I think, underscores that not just yet, but I think it's very important at the same time to recognise Svitolina's longevity in the top 10 is incredible. Raducanu's, however, skyrocketed to inside the top 10 after a US Open triumph, but there was not too much on the back end of that. And obviously it wasn't a surprise with that rankings regression. So what we want to see is the consistency and that level of maintenance throughout the season, throughout a number of events, which is going round to 16 further. At this case, this stage, no, because when we're looking at those metrics, they're not there. The level of consistency, the level of application, it is not there. And this is what is so paramount and so important when we're looking at heading towards maintaining to sustaining, obviously, your place, that position inside the top 10, but more, I think, succinctly inside that top 8% when we're looking at that top 10 tennis ranking. Thank you so much for joining us today. I mean, oh my goodness, finishing with the ASB Classic and just touching on a couple of players there through to the United Cup, which was more, I think, very detailed, through to the Brisbane International, which is probably even more detailed. I'm sure you can tell I get very excited. They're from the metrics, the statistics, the patterns of play, the keys, everything, I think, interworked within a player's results, their outcomes. Because look, at the end of the day, that's why we're here. 11 years I've spent, I think, uncovering it, and hopefully you really did pull some solid points out of it today, because even though we're not in sync as in like match and obviously the release of these episodes, I want to encourage you to track back, which means look on, I think, irrespective of where you view the tennis, and replay those matches. Listen to, I think, this episode at the same time, so really you can look at and I think refine, and it will help you optimize your game even further. For those players who I've mentioned, if you're inside the top 30, top 20, or the top 10, really, I think, pay attention to those key metrics, especially if your sights are set on going deep at the 2024 Australian Open. And so it's not just round of 16, but talking quarters, semis, finals, walking away with that championship. More, I think, importantly, if you're one of those players I listed that I'm keeping a close eye on, and who's poised for whether replicated success or that 5th Grand Slam, this is where it gets really serious and we get to the nitty-gritty and we know what it takes to get over the edge. Look, today I think we didn't get the chance to touch on that humanized approach, but it was the same pattern in our previous episode because our focus is really on real-time results at this stage, being, I think, the Australian Summer of Tennis. But look, to grab your copy of The Secrets to Optimal Coaching Success, head on over to AMA International. Even though we didn't dive into it today, there are some really solid insights there, and you will see how it's obviously correlated with, I think, to today's discussion. I think even more importantly / excitingly and more applicable with the Australian Open around the corner is to grab a copy of my new release, How to Develop a Top 10 Tennis Ranking. You can find that on AMA International or Amazon, irrespective where you're based around the world. For any comments or questions, head to AMA International topic thread, the social platform set on data privacy. To interact with Beyond Top 10 Tennis, head on over to Twitter, Threads, or Instagram. To catch up on our weekly coaching tips, head on over to TikTok. And to catch up on our blogs, head on over to AMA International and look for our blogs tab, or head on over to Medium. And as always, I'll leave all the links in the episode notes. For something a little bit different, head on over to Pink Octopus Books. That's where my fictional release is. To view this week's question and poll, be sure to visit Spotify if you're listening on one of the other many platforms. For something left of field, visit Spruik for some random polls. And of course, if you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, like, share, and all of the above would be absolutely phenomenal. And look, for those of you who are interested, we do have scholarships available on AMA International, as well as options to work with me exclusively to optimize your performance and to nudge you close towards that top 10 tennis ranking or replicated success to that maiden Grand Slam championship. So don't be shy and come and say hi. On that note, thank you so much for listening. I'm so incredibly grateful. I am your host, Dr. Ashley Morgan Berge, and this is Beyond Top 10 Tennis, and I'll see you next time.